One of the biggest myths I see in the gaming community is how Nintendo is oh so innovative, especially recently. There's been a whole narrative spun by various people about how Nintendo is the big savior of gaming fighting against the big bad Sony and Microsoft. Mostly the latter, though. And one of the biggest buzzwords I see is innovation. People will talk about how modern day Nintendo is oh so innovative, how they're fighting against other games being stagnant and the same thing each year, or just flat out trashy and buggy. But yet at the same time, every time I see these people praising Nintendo, I have to ask, where is this so called innovation at? I mean, sure, they might have had plenty of good games back in the past, along with the fact that they had third party support on their system, and at least one of their systems did have superior capabilities over the competitor. I mean, the Super Nintendo, that had a better sound chip which came straight from Sony, which was capable of playing sound samples back instead of the Sega Genesis, which had an FM synthesizer, along with the capability of displaying more colors. Sure, the CPU is slower, but to a casual, the Super Nintendo version would look better. And the Super Nintendo was the go-to platform for many games designed around it, such as the Final Fantasy series, Chrono Trigger, Shin Megami Tensei, Dragon Quest, or Dragon Warrior as it was called in the USA, along with many others. I mean, you could buy a Super Nintendo and play only a handful of Nintendo first party games because it had a lot of solid third party games as well. Now, of course, just like their competition Sega, Nintendo did provide a lot of strong first party games, especially for the time, as keep in mind, you have to sell strong games to have your system sell a ton. Of course, Nintendo eventually made a bunch of screw ups, and then in 2006 to 2007, around that time, they completely lost it and pretty much haven't made anything worthwhile since. I mean, let's be honest here. I see people talking about how Nintendo is so innovative, but let's take a look at where the innovation has been. It hasn't been on the consoles. With the Super Nintendo, not only did Nintendo blow some deals to make a CD add on, but then when you had the Nintendo 64, when every system became CD based, the Nintendo 64 used cartridges. The only other system to use cartridges at that time? The Atari Jaguar. It also didn't help that Nintendo used a complex design from a workstation vendor, which caused lots of issues when it came to programming, as many developers struggled to program for the system. And while on a workstation you could have fixed issues such as the texture memory, this could not be fixed on the Nintendo 64. Besides the expansion pack, which many later games either required or used to boost the game's graphics and frame rate. And while the GameCube finally used discs, which were tiny DVD discs, it suffered from the fact that the discs could not store very much data, along with the fact that the system was incapable of playing CDs and DVDs. So while the competition, such as the Xbox Original and the PlayStation 2, could play DVDs, your GameCube could not. It also could not play music CDs as well, nor did it have any backwards compatibility, which the PlayStation 2 added. The main thing the GameCube suffered from, though, and which many people still remember to this day, is the fact that Nintendo put a gimmick over a feature. Nintendo's gimmick this gen was the Game Boy Advance to GameCube link, where you could plug your Game Boy Advance into your GameCube and use it with a handful of games, either as a display or to link stuff between games. Yay, I guess? Oh wait, that feature never took off when Sony did it either, because keep in mind, that's not a very good feature. But Nintendo would revisit it a few years later, so keep this in mind. So what did Nintendo miss out on? Online play. Keep in mind, the original Xbox, the PlayStation 2, and even the Dreamcast had online mode. But yet Nintendo not only shipped the system without a modem or Ethernet adapter, which keep in mind, the original Xbox had an Ethernet port, the PS2 had an optional Ethernet adapter which later became standard in later models of the console such as the Slims, and the Dreamcast actually came with a modem. The GameCube, on the other hand, had only 4 online capable games. I don't know if it was something with Nintendo or what that kept online from having many things. But keep in mind, the GameCube had only 4 online games. So let me break this down a bit. Out of these 4 games, 3 were available in America, 2 were in Europe, all 4 were in Japan, and only 2 of them were original games and not ports of any other game. So what were these mythical 4 games? Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2, Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2 Plus, Phantasy Star Online Episode 3, and Homeland. Only Homeland and Episode 3 are GameCube only, as Episode 1 and 2 was later ported to not only the original Xbox, but also the PC. And to make matters worse, Episode 1 was available on the Dreamcast. So really, only the expansion pack was new for the GameCube, and I'm just going to say that because it was later ported to the original Xbox and PC like I said. 4 games. And keep in mind, you had to pay real money to play Phantasy Star Online on the internet. Now, while there were 3 LAN-capable GameCube games, 1080 Avalanche, Kirby Air Ride, and the main one, Mario Kart Double Dash, none of these tunneled well over LAN, and Mario Kart Double Dash can especially run real slowly, kind of like Super Smash Bros. Brawl or 4 when you try to tunnel it online. Now, just for comparison, the Dreamcast had about 28 online games, while the PS2 had a huge amount, 245. And this was on a system where the online wasn't even too popular because keep in mind, online was not front and center in Sony marketing, nor were many people aware that the PS2 even had online capabilities, and it also didn't help that a lot of PS2 games had early server shutdowns, though many of them have been unofficially revived through GameSpy emulation or similar stuff. And in 2004, Iwata said that customers don't want online games. Several months later, Halo 2 came out and sold millions and millions of copies. Halo 2 is also online enabled and a quick way for Xbox Live to grow big, as that game alone not only helped Xbox Live get big, but it influenced online gaming. And in 2004, the same year Halo 2 came out, Xbox Live hit 1 million subscribers. Nintendo, on the other hand, stuck with gimmicks, and they paid the price next gen. Next gen, Nintendo released the Wii. Now, the Wii was technically a GameCube with an overclocked processor, more memory, and, well, full-size discs. It also had some motion control gimmick, which would become a gimmick for a few years because a few years later, developers and console makers would all but abandon it. But despite the Wii basically being based off GameCube hardware, it was a sales success. It sold millions and millions of consoles, and for a few years was sold out in literally every store. You could go into any random store in the GameCube, Wii would be sold out. And what do I mean? There were news articles about people getting desperate just to get a Wii. And here's the thing, the Wii not only was underpowered, but it also lacked an online. The online was a primitive system, just like with the DS, and in fact, I'll get on this too. Both the Wii and the DS had primitive online that required friend codes. Instead of just adding a friend online, you had to type in a long, cryptic friend code, and both people had to do this, just to add yourself. And each and every game you had required this. Now, keep in mind, this was after Xbox Live came out, and after Sony was trying to be like Xbox Live, and then you have this, where it's primitive. It requires you to do a lot of stuff, just to do this stuff online. Just to add a friend, you have to do this whole cryptic thing. And you know what? It was a disaster. Pokemon Battle Revolution, the first Wi-Fi game on the Wii, got panned for having poor online capabilities, and this never improved with later Nintendo games despite the gaming media giving Nintendo criticism for it. The same could apply to the DS games, and while the DS had the excuse that it was a portable system, the DS also had the friend code issues. The game also lacked stuff such as voice chat, or other popular features you'd see on other systems for online games, released even years earlier. And while some games such as Pokemon featured voice chat, the voice codec was not only horrible, but if you used the built-in DS mic, you'd have tons of interference from the game's sound, and so many people simply left the microphone off when playing, like, let's just say, Pokemon. It also didn't work with random people either. So if you wanted to have voice chat with random people on, like, let's just say Mario Kart DS, you couldn't. To make matters worse, with the Nintendo Wii, you also had the issue with the whole thing being underpowered. The system was heavily underpowered compared to the Xbox 360 and PS3. For starters, the system could not upscale video beyond 480p, while the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox were capable of this. Not only that, to make matters worse for the Wii was also incapable of, let's just say, anything the 360 could do, as it was in an entirely different hardware league. It was only about as powerful as the GameCube, maybe original Xbox at best. As after all, it was an overclocked GameCube. And the GameCube was incapable of even rivaling, like, let's just say, the original Xbox, as there were games that were not on the GameCube that were only on the original Xbox, such as Half-Life 2 and Doom 3. And due to the Wii lacking power, and due to most of the games selling on it being only casual games, developers reacted accordingly, and most games on the Wii were casual games. Nearly every game that generation skipped the Wii as well, and many third parties pretty much shunned the system, as not only did games sell poorly on the Wii, but to make matters worse, it had the whole casual kids image, and not the image of a game system for gamers. And it also didn't help that Nintendo went from the old plastic design style of the GameCube, the N64, to this new design style which pretty much copied Apple's all white, glossy plastic, the one used in, like, let's just say the iBook, the MacBook, the iPod, and not the one used in the high-end Mac Pros, Power Mac G5s, PowerBooks, MacBook Pros with the nice aluminum that ended up replacing the white plastic for even the low-end Apple products. And let's also not forget that with Nintendo first party games, the whole Wii remote sideways control style became popular too. The only problem is, it offered very few buttons. And to make matters worse, many games, instead of mapping stuff to a button, used waggle the controller gimmicks even for these games. All while the Xbox 360 and PS3 went several years without these gimmicks. And when they did try the PlayStation Move and Kinect, they were abandoned a few years later, as after all, the whole motion control fad eventually ended up dying. The PlayStation Move is pretty much forgotten about, while the Kinect has been repurposed as an input device for the PC. And the Wii Remote? Does anybody even remember that thing exists? And in the end, Nintendo ended up ditching the Wii early because it was a crappy system that was underpowered, lacked many games, and was centered around gimmicks for casuals. Several years before the Xbox One and PS4 were announced, Nintendo announced the Wii U. And over a year before these systems came out, Nintendo released their Wii U, their newest gaming system, and it has been such a disaster. Despite having an whole E3 conference dedicated to third parties, with third parties showing up talking about how amazing this new Wii U was, the system ended up following in the footsteps of the Wii. Except it was an even bigger disappointment, as despite Nintendo trying to market the system as a return to form, the system is now being marketed as a Nintendo-only system because that's really what it kind of is. The system is yet another underpowered system, using yet another version of the old GameCube hardware for the processor, and the GPU being straight out of a low-end GPU from several years ago. Many big games aren't launching on the Wii U, and even many indie games aren't launching on the Wii U, preferring the PS4, the Xbox One, the PC, or mobile devices. And while Nintendo returned to using buttons, they did also add another gimmick that nobody asked for. The whole second screen gimmick. Now remember what I said about Nintendo trying the whole Game Boy Advance thing? Well, they decided to try it again with the Wii U, this time being the whole gimmick the system was designed around, and wow, it was a joke. The controller chews its battery up real fast, and it only has a small battery despite having room for you to buy a bigger battery. The screen is very power hungry, and the system saps power even when the controller is off, so you literally have to leave the controller on the charger all the time, or just remove the battery from the controller. I'd honestly recommend you do the latter though, because keep in mind, if you leave a battery on the charger too long, it will damage the battery and then it won't be able to hold as charge as long. Especially in the case of the Wii U, where that thing just chews up its battery. And to make matters worse, even though it had off-TV play, the Wii's Wi-Fi antenna is weak, so you can take the controller only a small distance before it cuts out. So in reality, there's no point in it because you can't just take the controller up to your room. Unlike what you can do with the Vita and the PlayStation 4, which despite the Vita being kind of a ripoff, at least you can take the Vita to another state entirely. In fact, there's even videos of people playing the Vita over state lines with their PS4, while the Wii U can't even go very far in your home before disconnecting the connection. Wow. And even so, it's not even an innovation because you can take the PSP into another room with the PS3, the only problem being both the PS3's remote play isn't that good, and neither is the PSP's internet connection. But it surprisingly works for games that are pretty slow-paced like PS1 RPGs. And I also use it to watch YouTube videos as well on my PSP with that feature. The online and system infrastructure sucks on the Wii as well, as while the online does have friends lists, it still lags behind Xbox Live even in 2002 or 2003. You still can't send cross-game invites, nor can you see what games your friends are playing without having to pause the whole game and disconnect an online match, which is why many online games won't even let you go to the home menu. Some of them, however, have built-in friends lists, kind of like what the original Xbox would have, where you'd go into the game and check your friends list there instead of in the main menu. And to make matters worse, the Wii U gamepad has an awkward controller layout, same with the Pro controller. The analog sticks are located above where you'd hit your buttons, while the 360 controller has the analog stick for the left side up on top, while the PS3 has it on the bottom. The Wii U has both of them on the top, which is an awkward configuration, especially if you're having to frequently reach, like, let's just say, above to hit a button like the jump button or the switch weapon button, and it just does not work. It really doesn't. And it's honestly one of the worst controllers I've ever used. And let's not forget that if you wear your gamepad out, you just can't buy another one at Walmart. You actually have to order, like, a new gamepad replacement or go on eBay and find one. And it's not cheap. It's not like it's even $60. Yeah, that's not cheap, but it's not even that. It's like $140 or $150 just to replace your gamepad. At least that's how much it was when Nintendo was still selling them on their site directly. And you can only use one of them with the system. For the other controllers, you have to either use Pro controllers, Classic controllers, or Wii remotes. And some games only let you use the gamepad, like Captain Toad. And what do people think of the Wii U? Well, unlike the Wii, it's been a disaster. Even the Xbox One, a system which came under fire initially for using DRM that would resemble Steam before it got changed and turned around. And of course, let's not forget the whole thing with the Kinect, with people coming up with theories on how it would spy on you and send everything to the NSA, despite the Wii U having a camera and microphone on its controller. I'm guessing it's okay when Nintendo does it, right? And the Xbox One, that system I mentioned, along with the PlayStation 4, have been outselling the Wii U. Not combined, each individually have been outselling the Wii U. And developers aren't even looking at the Wii U anymore. They're making their games for the Xbox One and the PS4 only. Not the Wii U, not the Wii, not the 360, not the PS3. Just the PS4 and Xbox One. And maybe the PC too, if you include that as a system. If the Wii U is such an innovation, why is it so abandoned by developers? I mean, what is there in this system that the developers aren't seeing? Where is this hidden power? I mean, I've seen people bring that up, saying terms like GPGPU, But consistently, you have developers churning out games that are either worse on Wii U or just have frame rate issues, unless they look like a 360 game. I mean, Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. That might have been a piece of crap game, but one of the main complaints about it was the frame rate and graphics. And you know what engine that game was made off of? The CryEngine 3. And you know what they were trying to do? Downscale it to run on an old console. I mean, have you ever seen what CryEngine runs like on a Pentium 3? There are videos of it on YouTube, and it runs just like Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. It runs like crap because the Wii U is an underpowered piece of crap. And here's the thing, developers have come out time and time again to say how underpowered the Wii U is. That's all that really needs to be said. These are the people making games for the system, who are shipping or have shipped games for it. And you know, they don't like it one bit because of how underpowered it is. And even Shinen, the one developer who was praising it, they're making a game for the PS4 now. Because that's all that really needs to be said. The Wii U isn't innovative. If it's really such an innovative system, then not only why are developers shunning it, but why do you see nobody using the Wii U as their main primary system? Because many people I see use the Wii U only as a secondary console and not as their main system. And it's a risky value proposition too when it costs $300, and for less money you can get a 360 or PS3, and for slightly more you can get an Xbox One or PS4 or a gaming PC. And as for the handheld market, all I really have to say is that Nintendo has done a great job at pretty much destroying the handheld market. While their systems sold a ton, their systems also gave handhelds the reputation of being kiddie systems. As handhelds such as the Game Gear and Turbo Express, designed for more mature audiences and the more mainstream gamer audience, flopped or did not sell as well as Nintendo's Game Boy, which was made cheap and targeted toward kids. And while Nintendo's handhelds have mostly been underpowered, the exception being the Game Boy Advance, they at least had the advantage of good battery life, but even that advantage is gone because look at what happened with the original 3DS. It got worse battery life than the Sega Game Gear did. And being cheap just doesn't cut it anymore either, when now you can walk into Toys R Us or Walmart or Best Buy, not only buy a cheap Android tablet, but now they have cheap Android tablets designed for kids, complete with rubber casings like an OtterBox to keep your tablet from having a broken screen when it's dropped. And I've seen fewer and fewer kids carrying around DSs, especially when the DS gained a reputation for breaking last gen, while I see more and more kids today carrying around tablets or phones. I mean, I'll go into like a restaurant and I'll see a kid playing a tablet game on a tablet, either on a kid's tablet or a full-size normal tablet like a Galaxy Tab, or iPad if the family likes to buy Apple products. And to make matters worse, tablets have also been able to help kids learn, along with helping people who are nonverbal, such as those with more severe forms of autism, communicate with other people. But let's be honest here with the 3DS and DS. Nobody has adopted the gimmicks these consoles have used. The dual screen gimmick, for example, has rarely been used outside of the DS. And while there were some devices that used dual screens, such as an Acer laptop or that one Sony tablet that was a flop and they had to blow out cheaply, most devices have stuck with one screen. As for touchscreens, they've been loaded on various other devices for a while, even before the original DS came out, as devices such as the Apple Newton, along with select GM cars, and of course, did I mention early computers, had touchscreens or devices similar to touchscreens. As for the 3DS, let's be honest here, 3D is dead. As in 3D with, the glasses and that stuff. Yeah, that kind of 3D is dead because nobody's even caring about it anymore. Sure, there are still a few 3D movies every year because movie theaters already paid money for the 3D equipment when Avatar came out, But does anybody with the whole 3D thing really care about watching 3D movies at home? I mean, sure, they have 3D Blu-rays and 3D televisions, but does anybody even buy them? I mean, I don't really see anybody going out to buy a 3D Blu-ray player or a 3D TV. And while there were some Glasses 3D phones, kind of like with the 3DS, that's gone now. Because now you're not seeing any more of them, even though at one point when the 3DS came out, there were also glasses free 3D phones, like the HTC Evo 3D. And while there are 3D digital cameras that can take 3D pictures and movies in better quality than the 3DS can, I'm not seeing anybody actually buy them. However, what people are buying is 4K. People are buying 4K monitors, 4K cameras, and company after company come out with 4K monitors and cameras. You're also seeing companies come out with 1440p monitors as well. And while I'm not seeing any PC gamer brag about their 3D vision, I am seeing a ton of them brag about their 4K or 1440p, depending on how much money they have, monitor. So in other news, what happened with the DS and 3DS have both failed to catch on. I mean, while the 3DS might have sounded like a good idea back in 2011 when not long after Avatar came to theaters, it's 2014. And yet, take a look at the 3DS. Nintendo had to stop advertising the 3D in the gaming commercials and even made the 2DS as a lower cost version without the 3D screen. I mean, go compare ads from the 3DS's launch to now. The ads are more about the games and less about the fact that the system has 3D. So in the end, Nintendo's hardware is not very innovative. It's usually underpowered, especially since the Wii era, and of course their portables have always been underpowered, along with the fact that their systems are mostly sold to kids, especially now. I mean, look at who Nintendo is marketing their systems for. Kids and casuals. Anybody who actually knows anything about gaming gets an Xbox, a PS4, or a PC. Not a Wii U or a 3DS. And after all you need to do is look at how well their systems are selling now to see what the public thinks of them. The Wii U has been a sales flop, like I said, and the 3DS has actually sold worse than the DS did in the same time frame. That's all that really needs to be said. But hey, I know the rallying cry from Nintendo's fanbase online is gameplay over graphics. They talk about the virtues of having amazing games over having graphics that actually look like something that's eye-pleasing. So, let's take a look at Nintendo's games and see what they've been doing lately, because after all, Nintendo is supposedly the savior of gaming and can do no wrong according to many people online, right? So let's talk about Mario, for example. The new Super Mario Bros. Series is pretty much an example of what happens when you rehash the same game too many times. 4 games, and yet they look the same. Sure, the levels are slightly different, but these are 4 different games on 4 different systems, and yet they have the same exact look. The same generic 3D bland art direction, the same generic level design, the same generic backgrounds. This is the same exact game pretty much on 4 different systems, even the same level themes. I mean, you could put the older Super Mario Bros. Games together and you'd see a difference, but then you put New Super Mario Bros. And New Super Mario Bros. Wii and New Super Mario Bros. U and New Super Mario Bros. 2 all together, and they'll look like the same exact game. And it pretty much represents one of Nintendo's main problems nowadays. Their games are rehashes, trying to play on the past. But I'll name a few more before I tell you my conclusion on that. But keep in mind, when you have 4 games in a row that not only look the same, but when you launch a big blockbuster next-gen system with one of those games that looks the same, that just says something. Oh, and did I mention that New Super Mario Bros. Does not run in 1080p on the Wii U as opposed to next-gen system? But let's get on to the next story. Super Mario 3D World and Super Mario 3D Land are pretty much New Super Mario Bros. In 3D. And that's what Nintendo put for their 3D Mario on the Wii U. And you know what? It also looks just like the New Super Mario Bros. Games. In fact, it also looks like the 3DS one. And remember back when Mario used to have a distinct visual identity for each 3D Mario? Well, try comparing them now, and they all look the same. And they don't even try to hide it either. Ever since the Nintendo 64 era, Nintendo lost their Western second parties. They lost Factor 5, they lost Rare, they lost Silicon Knights. However, they do have Retro Studios, who cancelled all their projects despite working with Nintendo just to make Metroid Prime, another game and an intellectual property. And while that game aged horribly, apparently a lot of people think it's amazing, I guess. And after making several Metroid Primes, they ended up making Donkey Kong Country Returns, and then Mario Kart, and yet another Donkey Kong game. And while they're working on a new Wii U game, nobody knows anything about it. Nintendo also has another big intellectual property called Pokemon, which is pretty much Nintendo's version of the Sonic franchise at this rate. Nintendo releases a bunch of Pokemon games, and they pretty much release them yearly with no regard to quality. They also release some in some bizarre generation format where they release 3 or 4 games on the same engine, usually in the same setting, and they're pretty much the same game except for the fact that the changes between each game in the generation read like a title update for a game on an Xbox 360, PC, or PS3. And of course you have to pay $30 to $40 for each of these games. And to make matters worse, every single Pokemon game seems to be worse and worse. After spending several generations improving from about Generation 1 to 4, Generation 5 actually looked worse than Generation 4 did, with its horrible scaling sprites that aged horribly despite feeling faster than Generation 4. I mean, I'm not even kidding, the sprites look pixelated as hell in Generation 5, and then Generation 6 looks like pure crap. And I really mean it looks like crap, because just take a look at its graphics. The graphics look horrible in Generation 6, or X and Y Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. I mean, come on. This is a 3D game on a system that's supposed to be more powerful than the GameCube, at least, and yet it looks like crap. I mean, I'm not even joking. I've seen better looking DS games than Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, because that game just has the blandest art style ever, and it seems to be abrasive to my eyes as well. The gameplay was also a rehash of the last few generations, but watered down even more, as Generation 5 and 6 have made the game easier, from Generation 5's linear maps to Generation 6 being both linear. And of course, did I mention how Generation 6 gives you the EXP share, which makes leveling up in Pokemon require no effort whatsoever? And did I mention how Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 had the hard mode, which had to either be sent from a friend, or you had to beat the whole game just to get the hard mode? And then if you restarted your save file, you'd lose access to them. Which makes you wonder, what was even the point of a hard mode if you have to beat the whole game and then you lose it if you restart your save file? Because that's what it says here, if you restart your save file after being sent the hard mode, because you can also send it to a friend, but then you have to have a friend who has the hard mode, first of all, to even, like, get it from a friend, and second, you actually have to, like, not restart your save file or you lose it. Thanks, Nintendo. The Super Smash Bros. Series has been getting casualized along with the Mario Kart series. For Super Smash Bros., it's not only had techniques such as wave dashing and L canceling removed, but it's also added stuff such as random tripping. Mario Kart, on the other hand, not only has neutered drifting or snaking, so it's harder to actually evade a blue shell, but if the blue shell hits you or doesn't hit you, it's all because of luck, not because of skill. And you also don't lose your item anymore if you fall off, like what the older Mario Karts would do to punish you for falling off in Mario Kart. Notice a pattern here? Yeah, Nintendo's games have only been getting more and more casualized and more rehashy. In fact, with the whole rehashy stuff with Nintendo games, it makes you wonder, why aren't Nintendo games getting criticized like sports games are? I mean, sports games are usually criticized by people for being the same exact game every year, but yet Nintendo, on the other hand, is making the same exact game pretty much once a gen, and yet they get a free pass for it. And sometimes they do it yearly, like in the case of Pokemon, and yet they get free passes for it. What is the reason for this? Because it's no different than releasing a sports game every year. People buy Pokemon because it's the same exact game every year, and I've even heard people say that if they changed Pokemon from the formula it's in, they wouldn't buy it anymore. I mean, look at how some people were criticizing Call of Duty Advanced Warfare for the new movement mechanics because they wanted it to be the same as Call of Duty 4. I've actually seen that happening. But at the same time, if you want to play older, like let's just say Nintendo games online, you can't really do that anymore. Not only did Nintendo shut down Wi-Fi connection, but the population of private servers hasn't really been that high. Along with Pokemon, where people don't even play the generation once the new one comes out. I mean, I haven't seen anybody play Diamond and Pearl, or Platinum, or Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and I haven't seen anybody play Generation 5 after, like, let's just say X and Y came out. They really didn't. They instantly buy the new game. And if you don't buy the new game, well, here's the thing. You can't really play a multiplayer game with nobody. Even if the servers are up, there's no point if there's nobody online. And you might be wondering why I've been using Call of Duty 4 footage for this video. Because I'm showing that you can still play this game online in 2015. It's 2015 now and you can still play it online, but yet nobody plays the older Pokemon games. And that's another thing. If these games are so innovative, I've got two questions. Number one, why is nobody playing these games years after release? And just because the servers are shut down isn't an excuse, considering how people still play PC games and original Xbox games with shut down servers today. I mean, people still play Halo 2 on land tunneling, and I know Battlefield 2, that game got shut down, and yet people still play that online. While other games, such as Halo for PC, have had updates that transfer them away from GameStop and over to new servers. While at the same time, Pokemon has not only been abandoned by developers, but despite private servers existing for Nintendo Wi-Fi, nobody bothers to play the older Pokemon games anymore. And I could say the same about Mario Kart and some of the others too. But that's what the point is. If these games are so influential, why is nobody playing the online modes of them anymore? But the second question here is this. If the games are so influential, why is nobody pretty much attempting to be just like these games anymore? I mean, have you ever noticed how nobody is really trying to be influenced by Mario and that stuff, or Pokemon? But yet Pokemon has been trying to add features that other role-playing games have had for years and years, such as more than one character in battle. And let's not even get started on something like, Call of Duty 4, how many games have tried to be like that game came out ever since it came out with the whole EXP system? Or Halo 3 with its whole file share and recording game clips, which eventually evolved into having the Xbox One and PS4 let you record footage of your games without even having to use a capture card. So in other words, these games that came out in 2007, and there were a lot of them, have had more impact than pretty much anything Nintendo's released since at least 2006, 2007. And in fact, I'll say this again, because I said this a while ago when I was making that one Pokemon video. All these games have been influenced by, let's just say, COD 4, there's been some influence from Halo 3, there's been some influence from Bioshock. There were a lot of good games released that year that had a huge influence. Oh, and Mass Effect 2. But yet, take a look at, like, let's just say Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. What has that game really done for the industry? In fact, what has Nintendo's post-2006, 2007 output done for gaming? It hasn't really done anything. In fact, I've got a pretty good analogy for Nintendo. Have you ever seen those rock bands which are has-beens, like maybe 10, 20 years ago, they were at the top of the game in, like, let's just say rock. And now, 10 years later, where are they now? Barely putting out new material, going around casinos and playing their old hits because that's really all they do now. Go to casinos, even though they're well past their prime, but because they got old people there and old people would probably recognize that band. And then they play some of their hit singles, and then they pretty much go to another casino and do it. I've seen so many bands that do that now, and that's because they're irrelevant to modern day music. I mean, sure, you might still have a bunch of bands putting out new material, new albums, or going to concerts and performing their new material instead of just their old hits, but for every one of those, you have a bunch of bands which are just irrelevant, and when you say their name, you'll think, gee, I remember them from when I was younger. And judging by what Nintendo has been doing, that's pretty much what Nintendo is like. I mean, let's be honest here. A lot of their marketing is to families who might know the Nintendo brand and no other brand. Games such as Super Smash Bros. Are sold with the whole premise being, this game has insert character here in it. I mean, don't you remember all those reaction videos people were making where they freaked out like crazy when they announced a new character in this video game? Hyrule Warriors did the same exact thing. And let's not forget how with, Mario Kart 8, they had non-Mario characters as DLC, such as Link and someone from Animal Crossing. I don't even remember their name because I actually play games which have gameplay. And of course Amiibos, which are Happy Meal toys. I mean figures with the quality of Happy Meal toys being sold for $13, which enable additional DLC-like features in your video game. And that's about it, really. And let's not forget, that's the reason the classic controller was unergonomic. To try to basically clone the Super Nintendo controller, but eventually they ended up making a more well-designed controller. And that's also why Super Smash Bros. Had the whole GameCube adapter. Notice a pattern here? Yeah, Nintendo is trying to play off nostalgia. How back in the day, we were the best company. And the fanbase does it too. Just look how many times you'll see people reference the gaming crash and how Nintendo saved gaming, of course forgetting computers, while also forgetting the whole fact that with Nintendo, in the last few years, they have not made anything worth buying. They just haven't. I mean, notice how, like I said, people bring up the past, but never talk about anything Nintendo does now for more than a week? Yeah, that's all I have to say. Remember when people were hyping up Hyrule Warriors, and then, like a week later, everybody forgot about it when Smash came out? I think that proves my point best. What Nintendo makes is not very innovative. And I honestly don't see how people can find it innovative when you see everybody online talking about how amazing it is. And of course, let's not forget all the retro NES merchandise you can find at your local Hot Topic. And that's all that really needs to be said. Nintendo is still stuck in the past. And that's all. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and please, I'd still love to know how Nintendo is being innovative when nobody is even acting like Nintendo exists. That is all.